Afternoon sunlight filtered through the cracks in the blinds, creating a pattern of light and shadow on the floor of Laura's small apartment. The silence was broken only by the constant ticking of the clock on the wall and the occasional frustrated sigh from the woman sitting at the kitchen table. Laura, a woman in her early 30s with disheveled brown hair and tired eyes, stared at the pile of bills in front of her. His fingers drummed nervously on the surface of the table, a habit he had developed over the years to deal with stress. The shrill sound of the doorbell cut through the air, making Laura startle. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath before getting up to answer the door. I knew who it was before I even opened it. "Good afternoon, Miss Laura, Mr." Duarte's deep, slightly irritated voice filled the hallway. The landlord, a portly man in his 60s with a neatly trimmed gray mustache, looked at her with a mixture of impatience and resignation. Laura forced a smile, crossing her arms defensively. "Mr. Duarte, what a surprise. What brings you here today?" The older man sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Miss Laura, I think you already know why I'm here. The deadline I gave you is running out." Laura felt a wave of frustration rise in her chest. "Mr. Duarte, we've already talked about this. I need more time. It's not easy to find a new place to live overnight." "It's been 3 months since I informed you about the need to renovate the apartment, Mr." Duarte replied, his voice now thick with exasperation. 3 months, Miss Laura. How much longer do you need?" Laura bit her lip, fighting the urge to slam the door in her landlord's face. She knew he was right, but the thought of leaving the apartment she had called home for 5 years was painful. "I understand your position, Mr. Duarte," she began, trying to keep her voice calm. "But you have to understand mine too. This is my home. I can't just pack up my life overnight." "Mr." Duarte shook his head, his expression softening slightly. "Miss Laura, I sympathize with your situation, I truly do. But I have a responsibility to the other tenants as well. The building needs this renovation." Laura felt tears begin to form in the corners of her eyes, but she fiercely suppressed them. She wouldn't cry, not in front of him. "Give me another week," she pleaded, hating the pleading tone in her voice. "Just one more week and I promise I'll have a new place." "Mr." Duarte studied her for a long moment before reluctantly nodding. 1 week, Miss Laura. Not a day longer." "Understood." Laura nodded quickly, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. "Understood. Thank you, Mr. Duarte." As soon as the door closed behind the landlord, Laura leaned against it, letting out a long sigh. She looked around the small apartment, her eyes roaming the walls filled with photos and souvenirs. How could I leave all this behind? With heavy steps, she returned to the kitchen table, picking up her cell phone. His fingers hovered over the keypad for a moment before dialing a familiar number. "Immobiliaria Novo Lar. How can I help you?" the cheerful voice on the other end of the line replied. "Mr. Pedro? This is Laura Mendez. Do you remember me?" "Ah, Miss Laura. Of course I remember. How can I help you?" Laura took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her decision. "I need your help finding a new place to live. ASAP." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Mr. Pedro responded, his voice now more serious. "I see. Well, coincidentally, I just received some interesting listings today. I think I might have some options that might appeal to you." Laura felt a spark of hope light up in her chest. "Really? That would be great, Mr. Pedro. When can we see these properties?" "How about tomorrow? I have a particular property that I think you'll love. It's a lovely house at a very reasonable price." "Tomorrow would be perfect," Laura replied, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. "Thank you, Mr. Pedro. You don't know how much this means to me." After working out the details with the realtor, Laura hung up the phone and looked around the apartment once again. Her eyes fell on a photo on the wall, showing her smiling alongside her parents in front of this very apartment the day she moved out. "It's time for a new beginning," she murmured to herself, a mix of determination and melancholy in her voice. That night, as Laura prepared for bed, her mind was filled with possibilities. She imagined what her new home would be like, her new home. Would it be bigger? Would you have a garden? Would you allow pets? Lying in bed, staring at the familiar ceiling, Laura made a silent promise to herself. This would be an opportunity for a fresh start, not just in terms of housing, but in all aspects of your life. She would be more organized, more punctual with payments, more. With that comforting thought, Laura finally fell asleep, dreaming of doors opening and new paths revealing themselves. Little did she know that the next day would bring challenges that would test her resolve and force her to face aspects of herself that she had long ignored. Fate, as always, had its own plans for Laura, and those plans would begin to unfold with the sunrise. Understood. I will write Chapter 2 of the story based on the synopsis you provided, incorporating the characteristics and skills of the profile of the screenwriter described. Here is the second chapter. The morning came too quickly for Laura. She woke up to the blaring sound of her alarm clock, feeling as if she had barely closed her eyes. The nervousness from the night before had turned into a palpable anxiety that seemed to fill the entire small apartment. While getting ready for the day, Laura found herself looking at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Deep dark circles marked his eyes, silent witnesses of the sleepless nights of the last few weeks. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. "You can do it, Laura," she murmured to herself, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "It's just a house. You've done harder things." The sound of the doorbell brought her out of her thoughts. Laura looked at the clock and cursed under her breath. Mr. Pedro had arrived and she hadn't even had coffee yet. "Just a minute," he shouted, running to the door as he tried to put on his shoes. When she opened the door, she was greeted by Mr. Pedro's warm smile. The real estate agent, a middle-aged man with a friendly face and kind eyes, seemed to radiate optimism. "Good morning, Miss Laura. Ready to find your new home?" Laura forced a smile, trying to mirror the broker's enthusiasm. "Good morning, Mr. Pedro. Yes, I'm ready." The journey to the new property was filled with Mr. Pedro's animated voice, detailing the wonders of the house they were about to visit. Laura listened with half her attention, her mind wandering between the anxiety of the present moment and the memories of the apartment she was about to leave behind. When they finally arrived at their destination, Laura felt her heart speed up. The house, even from the outside, was impressive. A two-story building with a well-kept garden and a welcoming balcony that seemed to invite long afternoons of reading outdoors. "It's beautiful," Laura murmured, almost without realizing she had said it out loud. Mr. Pedro smiled, clearly pleased with her reaction. "Wait until you see the inside, but first we need to wait for the security guard to open the gate for us." It was at that moment that Laura noticed the figure standing near the gate. A middle-aged man wearing a simple security uniform watched them with a neutral expression. Laura felt a pang of impatience. After all the anxiety of the morning, the last thing I wanted was to wait any longer. She approached the gate, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Good morning," he said, his voice carrying a tone of barely concealed urgency. "We're here to see the house. Could you open the gate, please?" The security guard, whose badge identified him as Mr. Felipe, looked at her calmly. "Good morning, ma'am. May I see your identification, please?" Laura felt a wave of irritation rise in her chest. Identification. "Look, I'm with the realtor. Isn't it obvious we're here to see the house?" Mr. Philippe remained impassive. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but it's standard procedure. I need to verify the identity of all visitors." Laura rolled her eyes, her patience running out quickly. "This is ridiculous. Mr. Pedro, can't you do something about this?" The broker, who had approached, looked uncomfortable. "Miss Laura, it's just a formality. I'm sure it won't take more than a minute." Taking a deep breath to contain her frustration, Laura rummaged through her bag looking for her wallet. When he finally found his ID, he practically pushed it towards Mr. Philippe. "Here you go." "Satisfied?" The security guard calmly examined the document, ignoring Laura's acid tone. After a moment that seemed like an eternity to her, he handed her the ID back and opened the gate. Thank you for your cooperation, Miss Laura. Have a nice visit. Laura passed through the gate without looking back, muttering something about unnecessary bureaucracy and waste of time. Mr. Pedro followed her, casting an apologetic look at Mr. Philippe. When they entered the house, however, all of Laura's irritation dissipated. The interior was even more impressive than the exterior had suggested. Wide open spaces, abundant natural lighting, and high-quality finishes in every corner. That's amazing, Laura whispered, her eyes taking in every detail. Mr. Pedro smiled, clearly relieved by the change in her mood. I knew you'd like it. Come on, let me show you the rest of the house. As they toured the rooms, Laura found herself imagining her life there. The spacious kitchen where I could finally try all those recipes I always wanted. The office on the second floor, perfect for work-from-home days. The master bedroom with its balcony offered a stunning view of the neighborhood. Mr. Pedro, that's perfect, Laura said, her voice thick with emotion. It's exactly what I was looking for. The broker nodded, satisfied. I'm glad you like it, Miss Laura. I think we've found your new home. As they discussed the details of the rent and contract, Laura felt more and more excited. This house represented not just a new place to live, but a new phase in his life. A chance to start over, to be a better version of yourself. When can I move in, he asked, barely able to contain his enthusiasm. Mr. Pedro hesitated for a moment. Well, first we need to finalize the contract with the landlord. He's quite judicious with his tenants. Laura waved her hand dismissively. I'm sure there won't be any problems. I'm an exemplary tenant. As they prepared to leave, Laura took one last look around, imagining herself living there. That was when he noticed Mr. Philippe watching them from the entrance. Is that security guard still here? He murmured to Mr. Pedro. I hope he won't be so nosy when I'm living here. The broker seemed uncomfortable with the comment but said nothing. As they walked towards the gate, Laura couldn't help but make one more comment. You know, Mr. Pedro, the owner should consider hiring a more efficient security guard, someone who doesn't slow people down with unnecessary bureaucracy. Mr. Philippe, who was close enough to hear, kept his expression neutral. Laura, however, was too busy imagining her new life to notice the meaningful look exchanged between the security guard and the broker. Little did she know that her words and actions that day would have consequences that would change the course of her life in ways she could never have imagined. Understood. I will write Chapter 3 of the story based on the synopsis you provided previously, incorporating the characteristics and skills of the profile of the screenwriter described. Here is the third chapter. The afternoon sun was already beginning to dip towards the horizon when Laura and Mr. Pedro returned to the house. The air was thick with expectation, and Laura could barely contain her excitement. His eyes shone with the promise of a new beginning, while his mind was already planning where he would place each piece of furniture, each painting. Mr. Pedro, I can't wait to sign the contract, Laura said, her voice brimming with enthusiasm. When can we finish everything? The broker hesitated for a moment, a slight frown crossing his face. Well, Miss Laura, we still need to discuss some details with the landlord. He's quite meticulous about choosing his tenants. Laura made a dismissive gesture with her hand. I'm sure there won't be any problems. I'm an exemplary tenant, after all. As they walked towards the entrance of the house, Laura noticed Mr. Philippe still at his post. She couldn't help but roll her eyes slightly. Is that security guard still here? He murmured to Mr. Pedro. I hope he won't be so nosy when I'm living here. Imagine having to show identification every time you want to enter your own house. Mr. Pedro seemed uncomfortable with the comment, but before he could respond, a familiar voice interrupted them. Actually, Miss Laura, there will be no need to worry about that. Laura turned around, surprised to see Mr. Philippe approaching them. There was something different about his posture, now straighter, more confident. The security uniform looked strangely out of place. What do you mean? Laura asked, a note of irritation in her voice. Mr. Philippe looked at Mr. Pedro, who nodded slightly before turning to Laura. "Miss Laura, allow me to introduce myself properly. My name is Felipe Rodrigues and I am the owner of this house." The silence that followed was deafening. Laura felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. She looked from Mr. Felipe to Mr. Pedro, searching for some sign that this was an elaborate joke. This can't be true," she stammered, her face turning red. "You're the security guard, Mr. Felipe, or rather Mr. Rodrigues smiled gently. "I'm actually a retired businessman. I like to meet potential tenants in person before renting my property. It's one way to ensure the house is in good hands." Laura felt a wave of shame and horror wash over her. All the rude things she had said, the way she had treated him. She looked at Mr. Pedro, who looked deeply uncomfortable. "Did you know that?" she asked the broker, her voice shaking. Mr. Pedro nodded reluctantly. "Yes, Miss Laura, it's an unusual arrangement, but Mr. Rodrigues has his reasons." Laura turned to Mr. Rodrigues, words stumbling in her mouth. I didn't know. I'm sorry, I never wanted to." Mr. Rodrigues raised a hand, gently interrupting her. "Miss Laura, there's no need to apologize. In fact, you showed me exactly what I needed to know." Laura's heart sank. She knew what was coming next, but still, hearing the words felt like a punch in the gut. "Unfortunately, Mr. Rodrigues continued, his voice firm but not cruel, "I cannot rent this house to you." Laura felt tears start to form in her eyes. All the stress of the last few weeks, the pressure of the impending eviction, the hope I had placed in this house, it all came flooding back at once. "Please," she begged, her voice breaking. "Please give me another chance. I was evicted from my previous apartment. I have nowhere to go." Mr. Rodrigues watched her for a long moment, his eyes filled with a mix of compassion and determination. "Miss Laura, I understand that you are going through a difficult time. But the way we treat others, especially those we consider inferior to us, says a lot about our character." He paused, letting his words sink in. "This house isn't just property to me, it's a home. And I want to make sure that whoever lives here treats this place, and the people around it, with respect and dignity." Laura felt the weight of each word. She looked around at the house that just a few minutes ago she imagined was her new home, and felt a deep sense of loss. I understand," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Rodrigues." As she turned to leave, Laura felt a gentle hand on her shoulder. It was Mr. Rodrigues. "Miss Laura," he said softly, "sometimes our greatest lessons come from our most difficult times. I hope you can use this experience to grow and become a better person." Laura nodded, unable to find words. As he walked toward the gate, each step felt heavy, burdened not only with the weight of his disappointment, but with the realization of how his actions affected others. Mr. Pedro accompanied her to the car in silence. Before entering, Laura looked at the house one last time at Mr. Rodrigues still standing at the entrance. She saw not judgment in his eyes, but a quiet hope that she could learn, change, grow. As the car drove away, Laura felt something shift inside her. The shame and disappointment were still there, but there was something else too, a dawning determination, a desire to be better, to do better. She didn't know what the future held, where she would find her next home. But one thing she knew for sure, this experience had changed her, and she was determined not to waste the lesson she had learned so painfully. Laura walked slowly through the park near her old apartment. It had been exactly 1 month since the incident at Mr. Rodrigues' house, and every day since then had been a journey of self-reflection and change. Laura sat on a worn bench, watching the family strolling and the children playing, their laughter echoing in the night air. She closed her eyes, letting the memories of the past 30 days flood her mind. After leaving Mr. Rodrigues' house, Laura had spent sleepless nights, turning over every moment of that day in her head. Shame and regret had been her constant companions, but slowly something else began to grow within her, a determination to change, to be better. With a deep sigh, Laura opened her eyes, her gaze falling on a young mother trying to calm a crying baby. Without thinking twice, Laura got up and walked over. "Can I help you?" she offered gently, surprising herself at the softness of her own voice. The young mother looked at her, relief evident in her tired eyes. "Would you mind holding the bag while I breastfeed you?" Laura nodded, picking up the heavy bag with a smile. As the mother settled down to feed the baby, Laura found herself engaged in a warm conversation with the young woman. It was a small gesture, but for Laura, it represented a big step in her journey of transformation. The weeks following the incident had been difficult. Laura had temporarily moved into a small rented room, her possessions piled in boxes around her. But instead of wallowing in self-pity, she decided to use this time to reflect and take action. She began volunteering at a local homeless shelter, serving meals and hearing life stories that made her question her own prejudices and judgments. Every face, every story was a reminder of Mr. Rodrigues and the lesson he had taught her. One particularly difficult night at the shelter, Laura met Maria, an elderly woman who had lost everything after a series of setbacks in her life. Maria's words resonated deeply with Laura. "My dear, sometimes we need to lose everything to find out who we really are." These words became a mantra for Laura, driving her to continue her journey of self-discovery and change. Returning to the present, Laura said goodbye to the young mother and continued her walk through the park. His phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a message from Mr. Pedro, the real estate agent. "Miss Laura, I found an apartment that might interest you. Would you like to take a look tomorrow?" Laura smiled, feeling a mixture of nervousness and hope. She responded affirmatively, setting an appointment for the next day. That night, lying in her makeshift bed, Laura reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. She thought about Mr. Rodrigues and Mr. Duarte, her former landlord. With a sigh, she picked up her phone and began typing a message to Mr. Duarte. "Mr. Duarte, I know it's been a while, but I would like to apologize for any inconvenience I may have caused in the past. I hope the renovation of the apartment is going well." Once the message was sent, Laura felt as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She fell asleep with a smile on her lips, looking forward to what the new day would bring. The next morning, Laura met with Mr. Pedro in front of a modest but well-kept building. The apartment was smaller than her old home, but there was something welcoming about it that immediately touched Laura's heart. As they walked through the rooms, Laura noticed an elderly woman watching them from the door of the apartment next door. With a gentle smile, Laura introduced herself. "Hi, I'm Laura. I'm thinking about moving here." The lady, who introduced herself as Dona Clelia, returned the smile. "It would be great to have a new neighbor. This building needs more youth." Laura felt a wave of heat in her chest. It was as if the universe was giving him a sign, a chance to start over. After finalizing the details with Mr. Pedro, Laura decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. That's when he saw a familiar figure across the street. It was Mr. Rodrigues. For a moment, Laura hesitated, the embarrassment of the past threatening to overwhelm her. But then, gathering all her courage, she crossed the street. "Mr. Rodrigues," she called softly. The man turned, surprise evident on his face as he recognized her. "Miss Laura, what a surprise to find you here." Laura took a deep breath, the words she had rehearsed so many times in her mind finally finding voice. "Mr. Rodrigues, I wanted to thank you. What happened that day? It was a lesson that changed my life." Mr. Rodrigues watched her for a moment, a gentle smile forming on his lips. "I'm glad to hear that, Miss Laura. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come from our most difficult experiences." They chatted for a few minutes, Laura sharing some of her journey over the past few months. When they said goodbye, Mr. Rodrigues said something that would stay with Laura for a long time. "Remember, Miss Laura, our true home is not made of bricks and mortar, but of the connections we build and the love we share." That night, back in her temporary room, Laura looked at the boxes stacked around her. Tomorrow she would start moving into her new apartment. But more than that, she was moving into a new phase of her life. Laura took an empty box and began filling it not with objects, but with memories of the last few months. The first meal he served at the shelter, the thank you note from one of the people he helped, the photo he took with Maria, the lady at the shelter. Each item was a reminder of her journey, of who she was becoming. When she was finished, Laura labeled the box My True Home because she finally understood that home is not just a place but a feeling. It's where we find peace, where we grow, where we connect with others and with ourselves. Lying on her bed, Laura smiled at the ceiling. Tomorrow would be the first day of the rest of his life. A life of compassion, of understanding, of continuous growth. A life where she would strive every day to be the best version of herself. And as sleep enveloped her, Laura felt a peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. She was finally home, not in an apartment or a house, but in herself. And this, she realized, was the most precious home of all.